Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about how it looks like Nintendo may have another big surprise title on the way for Switch 1. Now, could this still somehow be improved for Switch 2? Maybe, but there are a couple different rumors that have been going around as of late, both of which may be referring to this title, or perhaps both are referring to two different titles here, but there appears to be something going on with some sort of surprise title that Nintendo has yet to have announced, and I find this situation very curious, especially as we approach the launch for Switch 2, and think about how Nintendo may handle the waning years of Switch 1. And so I want to dive into all of that today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit that notification bell. So the most recent rumor on this subject is coming from Nash Weedle. We've discussed them in the past. I know some people like to debate their credibility, but they are responsible for the Metroid Dread leak and also the Mario and Luigi Brothership leak, which happened just last year. So I do think it's worth having a conversation about what they're suggesting may be in the works. And so here, reading this translation, Metroid 2D, planned for release in 2025, could be delayed. They had talked about a 2D Metroid release a couple years back. I think it would be strange to release the game beyond 2025, because the original goal was to launch on Switch 1. But the layoffs at 505 Games appear to have affected the other joint project with Mercury Steam, disrupting the studio's planning. Would you like to see the next 2D Metroid release on Switch 1? And so Nash Weedle is saying that there is another 2D Metroid in the works, again made by Mercury Steam, like the last couple 2D Metroid games, and it was initially planned for a 2025 release, but it looks like it's going to be delayed. So I'll say we look at how Mercury Steam put out Metroid Samus Returns in 2017 on the Nintendo 3DS, and then 4 years later, they put out Metroid Dread on the Nintendo Switch. Now, in 2025, we're approaching another 4 years. It would make sense to think that they could be ready for another 2D Metroid in this year of 2025. But in this year of 2025, we're also getting Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, a game that's been in development for many years at this point, a really big title from Nintendo, and this is probably going to be the focus of Metroid, so I never really even thought we would get 2D Metroid this year, even if it was completed, because right now, 2025, Prime 4 should be the focus, and we might even still see a release of Prime 2 and 3 remastered in lead up to Prime 4, so if we also got a new 2D Metroid game, that seems like a lot of Metroid in a short span. Personally, I'm even prepared to wait until 2027 for the next 2D Metroid. And I say that because what if Prime 4 has DLC? Might we enjoy that in 2026 in lead up to a 2D Metroid in 2027? There could be some consistent Metroid content coming here for a little bit. Of course, I also understand the argument that 2D Metroid is not 3D Metroid. They're two very different styles of games, so they both could happen in the same year. I still don't think it would make sense for a 2D Metroid to come out this year because of just how much attention's on Prime 4 and everything else going on with Switch 2 and all, but maybe in 2026, even if there is DLC for Prime 4, they could have both. That seems fairly reasonable to me. And I actually think it makes sense to have a 2D Metroid game available for Switch 1. Now, I would assume that it would come to Switch 2, but I'm willing to entertain the idea of it being a Switch 1 title. Yesterday we talked about how Nintendo spoke to their investors, and that Furukawa said that they are trying to consider various ways to enable many consumers to play their games on both the Switch and Switch 2. And so that may mean that there are going to be a variety of titles that are made for Switch 1, but also may have some sort of enhancement so they're still a little bit more relevant on Switch 2. Essentially, we may see a decent amount of cross-generation games or Switch 1 games with next-gen enhancements, or maybe just like a 4K upscale of some kind. Maybe there's a lot of games that aren't as sophisticated, so you don't really need Switch 2 hardware to fully realize the idea, and so just having some sort of 4K or upscale of some kind might be more than enough of an enhancement for a lot of Switch 1 games running on Switch 2. So I can see that maybe the next 2D Metroid comes out next year in 2026, and it has maybe a 4K enhancement of some kind, something like that, It's not a tremendous improvement, but somewhat of an improvement. So it's still relevant as a Switch 2 title, but it's also something that all Switch 1 owners can enjoy. And I think this would be a tremendous improvement over what happened back in 2017. So in 2017, the Switch came out, March 2017. But you want to know what released half a year later on the 3DS and not the Switch? A 2D Metroid remake, Metroid Samus Returns, in September of that year. And a lot of fans, myself included, kinda wished there was a Switch version of this game. It was stuck on the 3DS, dated hardware. We wanted to see an even better looking running version of this game. And that did not happen. But now, with Switch 2, we know there's at least backwards compatibility, so whatever sort of exciting titles Nintendo puts out for Switch 1, we look at games like Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition and maybe this 2D Metroid game, we're still going to be able to enjoy them on Switch 2, and if Nintendo is indeed considering various ways, maybe that does include some of these games having some sort of enhancement on the Switch 2. This seems like a fairly reasonable way to go about it. Taking a look at the last couple years of 3DS during the Switch era, this is what we got. In 2017, Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, Hako Boy, Mario Sports, Fire Emblem Echoes, Ever Oasis, Hey Pikmin, a Pikmin spin-off, a Metroid remake in Samus Returns, Mario & Luigi Superstar, Style Savvy, a Pokemon game, a Kirby spin-off, another Mario Party game. That was 2017, and you know what's interesting about that? That sounds very similar to a lot of the games we're getting right now for Switch 1, and for what we may get a little bit later down the road. 2018 is even less so. Detective Pikachu, a Dylan game, Sushi Striker, Warrior Gold, the Luigi's Mansion remake. And then 2019, just a few more. Yokai Watch, Kirby, and another Mario & Luigi title. Looking at these last games for 3DS, I think it gives us an idea of the kind of games we could see come to Switch 1 in the beginning years of Switch 2. There is going to be a couple years of transition here. And so a 2D Metroid game does kind of fit the bill, especially if it's a remake. Now, I'm not saying that this 2D Metroid game is not a new game. After what happened at the end of Metroid Dread and what we've heard from Sakamoto and his plans moving forward, I am very eager to see what happens next. But I don't want to rule out the possibility that it's a remake because there is another rumor from a few weeks ago from Brazil, PH Brazil, a journalist who's known to get some things right as well, and they were talking about a final big game for Switch 1 that is also a new version of a niche beloved franchise. And when I saw this initially, I talked about how it might be the rumored Fire Emblem remake from Nate the Hate. And perhaps that's what it is. A niche franchise with a new version could be a remake of Fire Emblem. But what if it's another niche franchise? What if it's 2D Metroid? And maybe it's a new title, but if it's a new version, then maybe it's actually a remake. And there are a few different Metroid games people would like to see remade. Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion. Now, what I would most prefer is, as I said earlier, a new entry in the Metroid series, Metroid 6, what comes after Metroid Dread. That's what I would like to see, and I do hope that comes out in 2026. And I also still think we are getting a Fire Emblem remake. What was Brazil referring to? Was it the 2D Metroid game? Was it the Fire Emblem remake? Was it something else? That is hard to say. But something I do want to talk about here is this idea of there being a final big game for Switch 1. And at first I was actually going to have final big Switch 1 game as part of the title for today's video, but as I thought more about it, I don't think that's fair to say. I don't think we're talking about the final big Switch 1 game. I mean, maybe 2D Metroid is the final big Switch 1 game if it comes out in 2026, but with what Brazil's referring to here, this seems like something that's going to be announced relatively soon, like in a direct, maybe in this month of February. And I don't think we're going to hear about the final big Switch 1 game this month of February. I think the idea is there are going to be some Switch 1 titles that are announced this year and next year. There will be less and less, very similar to how it happened with 3DS, but there will be some. And so Switch 1 owners are still going to have new releases to enjoy through 2025 and even 2026. Now, each year may be lesser and lesser. Last year in 2024, there was pretty much a game every month. In this year of 2025, I would assume that it's going to be a little bit less than that. Maybe it's just like 8 games. And then in 2026, maybe it's just like 5 or 6 or 4. and then by 2027, maybe it's just like 1, 2, or 3, and that'll be the end of Nintendo-published titles coming to Switch 1. But there will be a few years of a transition. And not all of these games are going to be the biggest, most exciting games. These kinds of games we assume will be released exclusively for Switch 2, the next big brand new Mario Kart, the next big 3D Mario, Smash Brothers, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, the next big new Zelda entry. These types of titles are going to be saved for Switch 2, but perhaps some smaller niche franchises, perhaps some of the Mario sports titles and party games, things like that, can still come to Switch 1, but also might have somewhat of an enhancement for Switch 2, so these games are relevant on both platforms, something that was not able to be achieved between 3DS and Switch back in the years of 2017 through 19. But what do you all make of this situation? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.